What if being nice all the time isn't always good? From the day we are born, people tell us that the best way to be good is to always help others, never say no, and carry everyone's problems on our shoulders. We learn to think that love means giving and giving, even if it makes us tired or sad. But what happens if you decide to take a break and care for yourself too? Suddenly, some people might say you're selfish or mean. The truth is, you're not being unkind, you're being smart. Taking care of yourself helps you stay strong, happy, and ready to really help others when it matters most. Carl Gustav Jung understood this tension with remarkable precision. He observed that the path to true psychological wholeness, a process he called individuation, demands a breaking away from the collective, from the invisible scripts that dictate how one should feel and act. Individuation is not an act of rebellion against humanity, but a rebellion against the illusion that our lives belong to anyone else. To mature, one must learn to carry oneself with integrity, to distinguish personal truth from the pull of social expectation. But this act, so necessary and so human, shakes the very foundations of relationships built on dependency and expectation. When someone sets a boundary, the invisible contract of perpetual availability is disrupted. Others may see refusal as a moral failing, a rupture in loyalty. What has changed is not the heart of the individual, but their tolerance for imbalance. What appeared as generosity may have been a subtle fear of rejection, a compulsion to please rather than a spontaneous act of care. The loyalty that was once praised may have been an unconscious strategy to avoid conflict, to secure approval. And when this pattern breaks, those who thrived on it are confronted with a stark and unsettling truth. They were not engaging with a complete, autonomous person, but with a reflection shaped to serve their needs. This is why the response is so intense. The person who protects their own energy is perceived as threatening, not because they inflict harm, but because they no longer offer themselves as a reservoir for others' unresolved emotions. In setting boundaries, one holds up a mirror reflecting the immaturity, dependency, and emotional fragility of those around them. The discomfort is not caused by the act itself, but by what it reveals. The recognition that love cannot thrive where autonomy is denied, that compassion cannot exist without respect for selfhood. Our society conditions us to believe that sacrifice is synonymous with virtue. From literature to cinema, from religious teachings to daily social scripts, the figure of the ever-giving parent, the tireless friend, the endlessly forgiving lover is exalted. Unconditional love is lauded. Total surrender romanticized. Within this paradigm, boundaries are perceived as betrayals, acts of defiance, even moral transgressions. But Jung challenges this notion profoundly. He asserts that true love, the love that endures and nourishes, is not born from fusion or compulsion. It arises from differentiation, from the capacity to engage with another without losing oneself in the process. To begin this journey of self-differentiation is to ask piercing questions. Am I acting out of genuine care or merely convenience? Am I nurturing the other or erasing myself for approval? These questions are disruptive because their answers often expose uncomfortable truths. Many of the connections we rely upon, we discover, were not forged in mutual respect, but maintained through dependency. They were sustained not by love, but by a network of unspoken obligations, roles, and emotional outsourcing. When one starts to step back, to refuse participation in family dramas, to not respond immediately to every emotional summons, the reactions are revealing. Gratitude transforms into resentment, admiration into accusation. The charge of selfishness surfaces not because generosity has diminished, but because the expectation that one should always give has been broken. Those who relied on this endless availability confront the void left by the absence of their emotional crutch, and the discomfort of seeing themselves mirrored in another's autonomy can be overwhelming. Jung frames this as a necessary stage in individuation. The person withdrawing from compulsive giving is reclaiming their psychic space, removing the projections others have laid upon them. The friend who constantly vented now faces their own loneliness. The family member who depended on emotional rescue must reckon with their own inability to cope. The partner who relied on tolerance to avoid transformation is called to maturity. These confrontations are painful because they strip away illusions of reciprocity, revealing instead a landscape of unconscious dependence. It is here that the distinction between coldness and emotional maturity becomes critical. Coldness is a withdrawal from life, a closing of the soul, often born from past trauma or the fear of vulnerability. It is a rigid defense, a shutting down of connection. Emotional maturity, in contrast, is intentional and conscious. The mature individual does not flee from relationships. They engage selectively, with clarity, with boundaries that are doors rather than walls. These boundaries are affirmations, declarations of self-respect, that invite genuine connection while excluding exploitation. The mature person observes without being consumed, supports without surrendering selfhood. They offer presence, not as a compulsion, but as a conscious choice. They no longer tolerate emotional overreach, because to do so would be to negate their own integrity. And herein lies the shock for those accustomed to fusion. Presence without collapse is often mistaken for coldness. To refuse immersion in another's chaos is seen as abandonment, when in fact it is an act of lucidity, a disciplined refusal to be yoked to another's unresolved emotional patterns. Establishing these limits acts as a clarifying force. Relationships built on projection, manipulation, or imbalance begin to crumble, not through malice, but through truth. What is revealed is often painful. Bonds maintained not by mutual respect, but by dependency cannot survive in the presence of clarity. Yet this collapse is necessary, a symbolic death preceding rebirth. Through these endings, individuation progresses, creating space for authentic relationships capable of mutual growth and genuine intimacy. To live with such boundaries is not to isolate oneself. It is to differentiate, to engage with others from a place of wholeness rather than lack. To understand oneself, one must learn to stop performing as the expected caregiver, the automatic peacemaker, the endlessly giving partner. One becomes capable of choosing with awareness whom to encounter and to what degree. This is the essence of psychological freedom, the freedom that makes possible relationships grounded in reality, not illusion. In this light, the act of saying no transforms into an act of profound affirmation. Each boundary is a declaration. I know myself. I respect myself. I invite others to engage with me as I truly am, rather than as a projection of their needs. This clarity, though initially unsettling, establishes a new standard, one where intimacy is possible only among individuals who are complete enough to respect their own contours and those of others. And yet, this path is not without discomfort. Losses occur, connections fade, familiarities vanish, but what is lost was never authentic. What dissolves was sustained by expectation rather than genuine reciprocity. Through the pain emerges freedom, a liberation from roles that have long constrained the soul. Individuation, in Jungian terms, is the conscious return to oneself, the reclamation of psychic space, the forging of a life aligned with internal truth rather than external approval. To say no is to say yes to one's energy, one's clarity, one's integrity. In doing so, one sets the stage for relationships capable of withstanding honesty and boundaries, relationships nourished by mutual respect rather than unconscious dependence. The individuation process, though solitary and often misunderstood, is the path to authentic presence. It is here, in the courage to honor oneself, that freedom is found and the soul begins to breathe. The journey of setting boundaries is, therefore, not an act of separation, but of alignment. Each refusal, each protection of energy, each assertion of selfhood ripples outward, revealing who can meet us as equals and who relies on our absence of limits to sustain their illusions. Jung teaches that only when one stops being a character in the narratives imposed by others does the self emerge as a whole, integrated, differentiated being. In this emergence lies the potential for love that is not consuming but sustaining, not fusion but dialogue, not obligation but choice. This is the essence of emotional maturity, the hallmark of individuation, the capacity to be fully present, fully autonomous, and fully engaged. It is the courage to endure criticism, the wisdom to withstand misinterpretation, and the strength to preserve one's psychic boundaries. To live this way is to embrace a freedom so profound that it reshapes every interaction, every expectation, and every bond. It is here, in this space of conscious differentiation, that one truly begins to encounter others. not as extensions of oneself or objects to soothe insecurity, but as complete beings capable of their own choices, their own growth, their own responsibility. To honor this, to live with boundaries and clarity, is to step into the fullness of one's own existence, to embody the very principle of individuation that Jung so eloquently described. Here, the soul learns that true respect, both for self and for others, is rooted in clarity. Boundaries are not walls, they are invitations to genuine connection, bridges to understanding and affirmations of integrity. They distinguish between what belongs to us and what belongs to another. They distinguish between love that nourishes and attachment that consumes. And in this distinction, the mature individual finally learns the profound liberation that comes from knowing oneself, holding oneself, and offering oneself only where it is welcomed, reciprocated, and honored. This is the journey that begins with a single act, the courage to say no, the courage to reclaim one's energy, the courage to become whole in a world that demands fragmentation. And in that courage lies the promise of a life lived with authenticity, presence, and the unshakable clarity of a self that is finally fully awake. In the end, setting boundaries is not rejection, it is affirmation. It is the quiet courage to honor your own soul, to preserve your energy, and to engage with others from a place of truth rather than obligation. The losses, the criticism, the misunderstandings are merely echoes of a world unaccustomed to clarity. Yet, through this process, you emerge whole, present, and free. You no longer live as a character shaped by others' expectations, but as a being fully aligned with your own essence. This is the heart of individuation, the maturity of the soul, and the pathway to relationships that are genuine, nourishing, and real. In choosing yourself, you open the door to authentic connection, and in that choice lies true freedom.